We're holding by the book of Leviticus, chapter 18. Again, welcome one. Holding by the book of Leviticus, chapter 18. We are in verse 2. And the Torah says, God spoke to the Jewish people, saying, the Bnei Israel, ani Hashem Elokeichem. Right? The Torah says that you should speak unto the children of Israel, and you shall say, I am the eternal your God. Now, here Rashi says, we said before, that I am the one who spoke on Mount Sinai, I am the Lord your God, whose kingship you then accepted. Now, therefore, accept my decrees, says Rabbi Yehuda the Nasi, Rabbi Yehuda the prince who organized the Mishnah. It was manifest as known to God that in the days of Ezra, they would immediately revolt against restricting sexual relations. That's what the whole chapter is all about. Therefore, he came to them and said, I made a decree and said, I am the Lord your God. Understand well, who is it that imposes decrees upon you? And the judge whose function is to punish, but who's going to give rewards as well. So he spoke quite a bit about that, about reward and punishment, and and how that works. And we speak in the last number of weeks going through this Or Chaim Kadosh, right, a blessed memory, right, more than 100 years ago, one of the major commentators on the Torah. And we mentioned last week that he was talking about foods and how every food has a source. It grows from the holiness of the Torah. Torah allows it to grow, right? And because of the sin of Adam and Eve, you had a mixture of good and bad mixed in together, right? Even within foods. That's why there's a command that you shouldn't get benefit from the fruit until after 3 years, right? Fruit-bearing trees shouldn't eat from them till after the third year. Just like there's chaff and straw in wheat, right? And bran. Just like you have to throw that out. Obviously, you can't eat it, right? So you have to eat the good part, take out the bad part. But he said, food has certain bad elements, part of it, but, you make a blessing, you eat what is permissible, and that has the power of getting, as if to say, you are getting benefits from God's spiritual light. Yeah, so now the Chaim Kadosh continues, and he said, okay, let's go back to what we were speaking about before, right? And he says that a person, what happens? We have desires. Everyone has desires, right? Part of the evil inclination. So he says this whole chapter, which whatever, we're gonna work our way through. But this whole chapter is talking about forbidden relationships in general. So he says when a person thinks about a forbidden relationship or seeing things they shouldn't see, and desire overcomes them, and the desire takes control of them, right? That's what he says here. That your desire takes control. Now, to overcome that, not easy, right? In other words, to have what he says, to have victory over here. To have victory over here, it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be hard. But he says you have to go far away from your thoughts, right? From your thoughts, and you have to look at this as something being very disgusting, right? You got to look at it as being totally disgusting. And just think about it, right? So in other words, these thoughts could overcome you, totally overcome you. And you got to stay away from it like the plague. You got to look at it as something being very disgusting. But he says, what happens if your eyes saw such a thing? You know, person, I don't know, either the person comes in front of them, they're on the screen, something pops up, let's say they saw, right? They saw this image, whatever it is. What happens now? Says Or Chaim Akadosh over here, what happens? You now put yourself in danger. You're in danger. Just like what happened to David HaMelech, what happened to King David himself. Oh, blessed memory. Same thing. Right, looks up, right, and Bathsheba, what do you call it? Thing around her, I guess she's taking a shower, whatever it was. Right, the thing comes down, he sees her naked, desired her, right? Let's say so. That happened. Right, that happened, and everything else happened afterward. He said he saw what he saw. Now you're talking about King David himself. Right? We're not talking, run of the mill type of people here. Right? You're talking about one of the greatest people in the history of man. But he saw what he saw. Right? And says Or Chaim Kadosh here, what happens in his chamber of his heart? He was awakened, and he did what he did. In other words, he had certain thoughts, and he acted on them. Now, Gemara says, let's just make clear, the Gemara says, and everyone obviously brings this out and say, look, what King David did. Yeah, he has. How's he allowed to be with Bathsheba? Right, he takes Uriah Hittite, gets him killed, right, puts him in the front, essentially to get killed. Yeah, and it doesn't look good, right? First of all, she's a married woman. That's the first thing. And second of all, he kills her husband. Seemingly kills her husband to take her as a wife. Now, obviously, it doesn't look good. Yeah, so Gemara says, anyone who says King David said making a mistake. Making a mistake. Now, what happened over here? What happened with King David? We'll just flush this out a little bit. What happened with King David? So, first of all, Bathsheba was not a married woman. Why? Because any time someone was married and their spouse went to war, they wrote a bill of divorce, retroactive bill of divorce, meaning if they come back, the bill of divorce, you get rid of. Doesn't have any weight. Doesn't work. If they don't come back, then retroactively, they're divorced. So, when David hooks up with Bathsheba, what happens? He's dead. Right? He's not married. Or let's say better. Even if he was still alive at this point. Even at this point, he's still alive. She's not considered married to him. Now, why isn't she considered married to him? Because he gave her a bill of divorce. And the bill of divorce only doesn't go in effect if he comes home. Well, guess what? He didn't make it home. Yeah, he didn't make it home. She's not a married woman. That's the first thing. The second thing is, Uriah Hittite, the Gemara says it's Bor b'malchus. Bor b'malchus means he's rebellious against the king. What's the punishment? What's the punishment if a person is rebellious against the king? Yeah, death. Death penalty. So really, he didn't deserve to be alive. That's the second thing, right? Because he's mort b'malchus, and he had death penalty on him for going against the king, rebelling against the king, right? That's the second thing. And the first thing, he wasn't married to her. He gave her a bill of divorce. Right, absolutely gave her a bill of divorce. So what did he do wrong? What did he do wrong over here? Right? So at his level, it looks bad. Yeah. But essentially, he didn't do anything wrong, really, technically. If it would have been anybody else, no one's even going to look the other way. No one's going to think anything of it. They'll use these two factors and say it's permissible. 100% it's permissible. Yeah, but you're talking about David Melech. You're talking about somebody who could have been the fourth of the Avos, fourth of the patriarchs. But he didn't make it. He didn't make it. So this looks really bad. It looks bad. But again, technically speaking, did he do anything wrong? He didn't do anything wrong. So comes on the Or Chaim Kadosh here. And the Or Chaim Kadosh over here says he saw what he saw. And because what he saw, he took into his heart. And then a whole chain of events happened. Yeah, then this whole chain of events happened. But interesting enough, through that relationship, who took over? What happened? He had a child. Who was the child? King Solomon. Very good. And he took over after him. So things don't happen by chance, right? When as we always say, if you're learning Tanakh, you gotta really learn it. We see what the Christians do when they turn Tanakh into an absolute pretzel, right? They give their own, explanation, which makes 99% of the time or 100% of the time makes absolutely no sense. What they're claiming. But it's not an easy thing to learn. Yeah, that's why, today, kids learn it, in Jewish schools, kids learn it, but they don't really learn it afterwards. They learn, what happened, the stories behind it, maybe some of the things, the rabbis say, whatever, but that's it. They don't learn it when they're older. They don't normally learn it when they're older. Now, the reason is because some of the verses in Tanakh seem, again, we're going to put that in apostrophes here, right? That seem, quote unquote, to contradict the Torah. They seem to go against the Torah. Okay, they have to be understood. Obviously, they don't go against the Torah because the prophet can't go against the Torah. Yeah, otherwise the false prophet, right? Those we just read. If a prophet comes, even if he does miracles, but he tells you, I uproot some things from the Torah, you don't listen to him, you kill him. You get death penalty. False prophet. Yeah. So therefore, if a prophet or the writings seem to contradict what the Torah says, we are going to explain it where it's not a contradiction. Yeah? You can't have contradictions. They can't contradict what the Torah says. So what do I see over here? Says Or Chaim HaKadosh, David HaMelech saw what he saw. Whole chain of events happened because of it. And again, technically speaking, he didn't do anything wrong. Seemingly didn't do anything wrong. And the reason is, again, she's not married to him legally. And he had a death sentence. And the death sentence was his mord b'machus. Right? He was rebellious against the king. This comes on the Or Chaim HaKadosh here. And he says, he did what he did. Now, even at the beginning of his thoughts, when he sees Bathsheba, what did it do? It caused him this desire. Caused the desire within him. Well, again, things don't happen for no reason. This was a test. This was a test for him. Now, if it wouldn't be for Nathan and Avi, they to the prophet, Psalm 41, he chastises him. He wouldn't have thought he did anything wrong. Even though the Gemara says he really didn't do anything wrong. But he wouldn't have even thought. He wouldn't have even made the connection. At his level, what did he do wrong? What essentially did wrong? She's not a married woman. And he's liable for death penalty. So you tell me the way it looks, okay? At his level, the way it looks. For most other people, it probably wouldn't be a sin at all. Or David HaMelech here. Right? Or some level of something. Even though the Gemara says he didn't really sin. But what happened? What happened? Says Or Chaim Kadosh, he saw something, led to a whole chain of events. But because of what he saw, so in his nature now we had certain desire. This desire overcame him. So we say every day, in the Shema, in the third paragraph, we say at least twice a day. These guys say twice a day. We say, Lo sasur acharei levavchem v'acharei neichem. You're not allowed to stray after your hearts or after your eyes. Yeah, says the Rambam. The Rambam says that applies both to men and women. It doesn't just apply to men. Yeah, it applies to both. Women not innocent here either. So what can happen? A person sees something, they have desire. Right? That desire can overcome them. And what does he bring down from here? Where do you see it from? None other than David Melech. You see it from King David himself. He saw what he saw and he burned inside. He had this desire, it overcame him. Totally overcame him. But even so, technically, he really didn't do anything wrong. But you see, that's the power. That's the power. That's why we're going to be careful. What we hear, what we see, all the more so what we see has an effect. Yeah. So what do we say? Last week we says David Melech, says King David himself in Psalms chapter 40, verse 9. He says, I want to do your will. Right? He says to God, I desire to do your will. And that Torah should be in my stomach. So he spoke about that, about food and how it affects you and all that. So you got to fill yourself 100% with Torah. Because if it's 50-50, 40-60, or even less, you'll be affected by your environment. Now some people say, okay, you got to live in this world. What are you going to do? You got to live in this world. God gave us, all these great foods and stuff to eat or whatever. Okay. That means, I have to be, at the Goodyear blimp, be 40 pounds overweight or 20 kilo overweight or whatever. I'm allowed to drink, says the Ramban, doesn't mean I'm allowed to be an alcoholic. But I have to know how to use things within reason. Doesn't mean I have to eat bran all the time and eat seaweed and all that. I can enjoy as well within reason. But see, all these things, what happens? They have an effect. And some people will say, not going to affect me so much. I can do this, I can do that. I can also learn Torah. You can follow sports, watch ball games, what's the big deal? I can still follow Torah and keep Torah. Right? No contradiction. But what happens? Forget about things being forbidden. That's, it goes without saying. But let's break it down. What do these things do? They have a negative effect. Some of it could be attached to idolatry. You give it more power than it has, then it definitely should have. That's idolatry in general. Right? You give me something power that doesn't have. Taking God out of the picture. Right? But at the end of the day, it's very good. We're beginning the month of Elul. But every day, what's my goal? My goal is, or the goal should be, attach yourself to God. That's the goal. Right? As a Jew, keeping the mitzvahs, a non-Jew, keeping whatever applies to them. That's the goal. And when I go against that goal, when I fight against that goal, it's as if I'm taking steps backwards. So imagine, on a daily basis, let's say on a good day, let's say a person took 10 steps backwards. On a good day. They took, on a great day, he didn't take any steps backwards. Okay. Let's say you took 10 steps backward. Now, by taking 10 steps backwards, doing things you shouldn't do, or saying things you shouldn't see, or hearing things, or speaking things you shouldn't say. Now, you can repent, you try and gain it back, but essentially, I have to take 10 steps forward in order to get to zero, in order to be positive. Now, if a person does this on a regular basis, they don't knock out all the sins, right? Or maybe even a fraction of them. So again, 10 a day, 70 a week, right? I mean, I'm being generous here, right? So let's say 70 a week, 280 a month. So you got 2,800. You got like 3,500 a year. Let's say, but that's being generous. Now let's say you knock some of them out. Let's say you knock half of them out. Very good. So you're left with, let's say, 1,700. Yeah, probably a lot more than that, but let's say. That means my relationship to God, I took 1,700 steps backward. 1,700 steps back. I'm talking thousands, probably thousands. That we don't even account for. But let's say, I'll be generous here, 1,700. Get 1,700 steps you took backwards. That means if I want to be positive, I have to take 1,700 steps forward to get to zero. The daunting task. Over a lifetime? But you tell me, come on. If a person truly repents, you uproot them. And those things are like mitzvahs now. It's like you didn't do anything wrong. Okay. Right? That would work for a Jew, not for a non-Jew. For a non-Jew, repentance just stops you from getting punished. That's what it does, but doesn't uproot it altogether. Right? That's the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew. But besides that, fundamentally what happens? Fundamentally, when I take one step backward, one step, that means I have to fight tooth and nail to get back to zero to be positive. Because anytime I do the wrong thing or anybody does the wrong thing, you're going backwards. Your relationship to God suffers. But that's just the springboard. Why? Because just because you took one step backwards, you opened up yourself for sin. Because you opened up yourself to sin, what can happen? Right? The floodgates can now open. Because now you're a vessel to sin. So I'll give an example. Person, a Jew says Shmona Esrei, right? 19 blessings. We'll call it the Amidah, Shmona Esrei, whatever you want to call it. There are 19 blessings. Now, why does somebody sometimes lose concentration in the middle of these blessings? Why does their mind wander? Right? Why does their mind wander? Yeah. Why does their mind wander? Comes along there, Arizal. Provides the glory of blessed memory. Yeah. He says according to Kabbalah like this, very simple. A person's mind will wander because they're a vessel open to sin. Right? Now let's analyze that. Person does something wrong. Or they do many things wrong. It means they open themselves up to sin. Now, proper repentance, you knock it out. Very good. That you can knock out. Okay. But still, says the Arizal, you opened yourself up to sin. Therefore, when a person prays, you can think about other things. So that means if we were perfect in many ways, which we're not, even though someone's going to say, come on, prayer is something that always needs to be strengthened. True. 100% always needs to be strengthened. It's something we have a hard time with anyway. Okay. But if we were standing in front of the King of Kings, or we'll say better, if you were standing in front of a king, flesh and blood king, that could kill people left and right if he wanted, someone with real power, right? Nobody really has that power today, but somebody with real power. Yeah, that type of power. Now, if you go in front of him or her, doesn't matter, queen, king, whatever, right? Nonetheless, you go in front of them to plead whatever you need. Now, you might be nervous. You might get tongue-tied. Okay. But I guarantee, guarantee, um, guarantee a person, their mind's not going to wander. Their mind is not wandering at that time. Or it shouldn't wander. Why? Because you're standing in front of someone who's got real power. You say something and then you don't remember what you said, it could cost you in a major way for many things. So a person is obviously, they're going to have dread, fear in front of them from what they see, from what possibly could happen. They're not thinking about other things, at least at this point. They're focused on exactly what they need to focus on right now. That's what they're focused on. Their mind ain't wandering. Why not? Could cost them. Could seriously cost them. Yeah? They're focused, which they should be. Now, the question's going to be, if that's by a flesh and blood king, yeah, what are we going to say about the King of Kings? Now, you're going to say prayer's not a good example. Because prayer is something we always need to strengthen ourselves in. Okay, granted. But what about other actions that we do? Does that mean God's not here? God doesn't see it? Person, in their own room, no one else is around. You, yourself, and I, all three of you, right? Simple complex here, right? All three of you, very good. What does the person do? Does the person have fear of God no matter where they are? Or only in certain times? Now, where does this come up? This will come up where a person will be more afraid of man than they will be of God. They don't want people knowing what they're doing. They'll be more secretive. Okay, but God knows everything. God sees everything. Why does that affect them? We say we can't be perfect all the time. But woe to the person that's afraid of flesh and blood, but not afraid of God himself. It's a lot worse. 100% worse. Because that means you only fear, quote unquote, people who can see you. Doesn't God see everything? God sees everything. Does God understand the thoughts of man? Sure does. It's one of the 13 principles of faith. Right? Maimonides brings it down. God knows the thoughts of men. So I would say forget about anything else. Forget about persons by themselves. And a person's doing things on their own. Or whatever. They'll say, well, man can't see me. Well, certainly God could. But even without that, what about your own thoughts? Doesn't God know your thoughts? God knows your thoughts. Now, one of the benefits is not all your thoughts you get punished for. Maybe some of them. Said by immorality, you could get punished for. Even if you don't act on it. You think about it. Or idolatry. Two things that God hates more than anything else. Yeah, so if a person in their mind would say, in their mind, they don't even say it outright. They say, JC is my God. That's our prohibition of idolatry? Very well could be. Now, what's the prohibition of idolatry? You bow to it. Yeah, you do wine libations to it. You sacrifice to it. You worship it. However it's supposed to be worshipped. Right? Those are the big ones. But if a person thought normally we say, Talmudic dictum is The verb Shabalev and of the Varim. Words of my heart don't matter. But in certain things, they do matter. Not everything. Not most things. Yeah. But where are a person's thoughts in general? And see, God knows the thoughts of man. So after the person dies, after 120 years, God's going to say, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do the other thing? Whatever. But he's going to show you what you thought also. And what your thought processes were. Now, it's not going to be part of the sin. Certainly could be. Did you do it intentionally? Not intentionally? You weren't thinking? Yeah? Whatever, we're not always necessarily thinking straight. We're tired, we're distracted, other things. If a person concentrates, like in this case, I should have brought this up before. If a person sees something, they see an image they shouldn't see, let's say. Now, if they fantasize about it, they think about it, that's forbidden. If they saw it for a split second, they don't think about it, they work hard to get it out of their system, good. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about someone who thinks about it. Yeah, thinks about it more, thinks about it less, doesn't matter, they think about it. They fantasize about it, let's say. So that has an effect. That for sure has an effect. And if a person doesn't think straight, according to Torah, depending on what it is and what they're thinking, they could be punished for it, right? Every sin, God's going to judge it, how you did it, why you did it, where you were holding at that time, and what your intention was. Yeah, one of the things we beat our chests for on Yom Kippur, person runs after evil. Just like go slowly, this and that. Person runs. Not literally. Yeah. But, they get a certain amount of free time, they're going to do X, Y, and Z. That's forbidden, let's say. They're just waiting for that time. Think about the thoughts that a person has. 20 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, but they're thinking, when this happens, I'm going to do X. The person's not innocent. They have intention. And when a person has intention, even if it's based on desire, which is most people today, right? There are no true philosophers today. People say, I don't believe in this, I don't believe in that, because they looked at all world philosophy. We don't have anybody like that today. Not even close. Everybody else today, why are they doing things? Why don't they believe in Torah mitzvahs? Desire. It's all about desire. That's it. More desire, less desire, come up with all kinds of crazy ideas, but desire. Absolute desire. To come up with, Webster's 8th definition for certain things. They'll make it up as they go along in order to fit what they want to do. Exactly what they want to do. But that comes at a price. Yeah. So why are we worried about that? If a person reads Path of the Just, you go through Path of the Just. The book by the Ramchal, or the Musar book, the book itself goes step by step how a person can reach, step by step to get to divine inspiration, which is a lower form of prophecy. Right? One of the things over there is cleanliness, nikias, as it's called. It means cleanliness of thought. Right? By a certain point, when a person's going through this book, how many people can say they're going to get past this level? That at all times, or most times, person's in control of their thoughts. Now, a person will say, what do you mean? Of course, I have free choice. Right? No one's putting a gun to my head to think certain things. Very good. You're in charge of what you think, let's say. Then you hear something, you see something, and your mind goes crazy. And your mind starts, racing this and that. Okay, you can fight against it. You can work hard to fight against it. Very good. And that's what we should do. But who can say that they're going to pay? He says there are ways to acquire it. There are ways to lose it. Yeah, he says it with all these character traits. Now, if you think about it, how can somebody on a regular basis living in this world have pure cleanliness of thought? Who can sign on the dotted line, right, and say that day in and day out, or let's say on a daily basis, can someone sign a piece of paper and say 100% they had cleanliness of thought the whole day? On a daily basis. Now, let's take that over 7 days. Maybe some days you will have, and maybe other days you won't. Won't be the whole day you won't have it, but you have lapses, right? A person will have lapses. Now, what happens when you have lapses? What's going to happen? Right? What's going to happen? Leads to other things. Then it can spiral. Potentially it can spiral out of control. So you're going to say, but I'm doomed. Right? I'm doomed anyway. There's no hope. Someone mentioned to me, whatever, a while ago, a number of years ago. If you sit and learn, let's say a person's sitting and learning, all morning. Let's say 9 o'clock to 1, let's say. He said, I'd be willing to pay $500 or $300 to anyone whose mind either doesn't go astray at some point, right? Or that they waste time when they could have been learning. They speak to somebody about something that has nothing to do with learning. He says, I'm willing to pay somebody who can go through a full 3-4 hours without doing that. This generation. There could be people sitting learning for years. How many people can say they're 100% clean from that? Let's say that, they don't talk about politics. They're not talking about other things. They shouldn't be, they're wasting time when you could have been learning. It's more for men than for women, but okay. This person said, I'll put $300 down on the table. Anyone can do it. For this generation. You had people in previous generations, 4, 5, 6 hours, they could be standing in one place. In one place, learning, thinking. Don't get distracted. You say that's by great people, it's not by us. They also started out as kids. They didn't start as a lot of great people did not start out as child geniuses. Some did. Some definitely did, but a lot didn't. They worked on themselves. So you see, it's possible. You say, but that was the last generation. That was like 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Let's say. We're a much weaker generation. Granted. I'm just pointing out. Yeah, out of a 7-day week, how many people are going to say half the week they were in control of their thoughts? I'm not talking about anyone mentally challenged. Making it very simple. How many people are in control of their thoughts 100% of the time? Or 75% of the time? Now, some people are great. Yeah, we hear things, we see things, right? Again, what if it's onus? Someone's going to ask that. What if it's beyond your control? Okay. Yeah. So it's a test. Very good. It was beyond your control. Now the question is, how are you going to deal with it? This person's going to have thoughts about it, or they're going to try and get it out of their head 100%. So if they try, if it was under onus, it's beyond their control, they try and work very hard to get it out of their head, good. So they're not affected by it. But if not, then they start thinking about it. Even if it was an onus, they're guilty now. They're 100% guilty. The person will say, well, might as well give up now. You know? So at some point, someone's reading this book, Path of the Just. A lot of people learn it during the year. They learn it now. Right? It's good, preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yeah. So a person will say, you get to that chapter, or other chapters, and you'll say, like, this is impossible. He's not speaking to this generation. I mean, when did the Ramchal live? The 1400s? Or 1600s? He's talking 500 years ago? 400 or 500 years ago? People were different. Okay. This is a book everybody learns. Like the Chofetz Chaim says, in a number of places, he says in Duty's Heart, don't think I'm talking to the righteous. I'm talking to everybody. Applies to everybody, right? He spoke last night, Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Father, about bearing a grudge. Right? The Torah says, you're not allowed to bear a grudge. Someone did something nasty. Somebody said something. Somebody caused you damage. Now, everyone will tell you if you bear a grudge, you stir it up in your heart. It's bad. Any psychologist will tell you that. Right? You got to get it out of your system. You got to deal with it somehow. Whatever it is, you see the bigger picture. You see, however you deal with it. Okay. But when the Torah says don't bear a grudge, who do you think he's talking to? Right? You think he's just talking to the righteous? Right? This week's Parsha Shoftim. Yeah. It says that rabbinic court judges should not take bribes. Well, he says it's obvious. Nobody should take a bribe in any position. Yeah. So that specifically, why specifically rabbinic court judges? Tell me everybody's not allowed to take a bribe if they're in a certain position. It sounds like a rabbinic court judge is supposed to be on a high level, have a lot of knowledge, have a lot of spiritual knowledge, working on themselves. And what is taking a bribe to? Blind the person. Yeah. So we hold, practically speaking, if a rabbinic court judge knows one of the sides, they come in front of him for judgment. If he has any sense of bias whatsoever, he can't judge the case. Any bias at all. Let's say this person helped him out with something. Gave him a ride somewhere. If he has, he got benefit, let's say, and that benefit skews his thoughts about who the person is, he can't judge the case. He's got to take himself out of the case. He's got to say, I'm too biased. I can't, he says I can't judge this case. Got to find someone else. Got to find another judge. Yeah. That's a total prohibition. Why? Because they don't see things straight. Someone did them a favor. You say, big deal. They did him a favor. If the rabbinic court judge can look at them, in an objective way, and that they wouldn't be afraid to say that they're guilty if they're guilty, then they can judge the case. But if they have any sort of bias whatsoever, they can't judge the case. It's forbidden. Yeah. Now, it's very interesting. The Torah is telling you, don't take a bribe in a very specific case. And the case is if you're a rabbinic court judge. So what would we say? What would be the obvious thing we would say? We would say, of course you don't take a bribe. It skews the way a person thinks. A person's going to have a bias. Very good. 100% they're going to be biased. True. Very true. Isn't everybody going to be biased? Should it be forbidden for everybody? Sure. So why you specifically have been a court judge? Because the bigger the person spiritually, the bigger the evil inclination. So therefore, the Torah has to warn the biggest people to say they have to be careful. Does everyone have to be careful? Sure. That'd be obvious. So why are you telling me, or why is the Torah saying specifically by a rabbinic court judge? Because their inclination is bigger. Because they're greater in different ways. So the inclination works on them much harder. Much harder. So in all these things, as we said many times, we're affected by what we see. Images that we see stick with us like glue. They never, ever, ever disappear. They're part of our psyche. Now, they might be buried for years. They may not come up for a long time, but they could come up. They're there. They haven't totally been obliterated. Yeah, someone put up a post a while ago, and they say, name the scariest movie you saw as a kid. Some people said Jaws. Some people say, back in the day. Some people said Friday the 13th. Someone said, those movies with Chucky the doll, whatever. Aging myself here a little bit. Some will say the what do you call it? Friday the 13th. And all that. Everyone has their different thing, whatever it was. And people say, oh, I had nightmares from this and that. Okay, they saw him as a kid. Good. But don't they know, even as a kid? I mean, probably explained to them, I'm sure. They know it's not real. They know it's all make-believe. They know, some of these people, if they're still alive, probably like, somewhere having a beer or whatever. Like, whatever they're doing. They didn't say, oh, I can't believe they killed him and how they killed him. They didn't. He's still alive. They didn't kill him. Right? It's all make-believe. We get caught up in it. So these things, even if it happened 20 years ago, even if it happened 30 years ago, whatever, right? Whenever a person, is a kid, now all these memories come back. They might not have thought about it for years, okay, but the memories are there. 100% the memories are there. Whatever they saw, that has an effect. What we see has an effect. What we see overcomes us, can overcome us. So shouldn't we be a lot more careful? You would think. Because now, it's not just we're born this way, right? It's not just we're born this way. What happens? We did it to ourselves. We got no one to blame but ourselves. And now it's part of us. Once it's part of you, you see, if God says, listen, I made you a certain way, I gave you certain DNA, so you don't have a choice who your parents are, right? You're born against your will, you die against your will, right? The soul has to go in the body. God puts the soul in the body. You don't have a choice who the body is. God convinces the soul where to go. You don't have a choice who your parents are, siblings are, socioeconomic situation. You have no control. You have absolutely no control. So you can claim, after a person dies, God's going to say, why'd you do this, why'd you do that, why'd you do the other thing? So a person will say, okay, let's look at my DNA. Let's analyze the DNA. Yeah, so you say, God, did you give me this DNA? God will say yes. And you gave me, 3-4 extra doses of anger. Yes. Very true. You gave me 3 or 4, 10 extra doses of, I don't know, immorality. Okay. You gave me, all these doses of speaking badly against others. God, you're right. All these things you're 100% right. I made a part of your DNA. So what's the soul going to say? Very easy. Very simple. The soul's going to say, you can't punish me. You did it. You made me that way. Right. So God says, why did I make you that way? I didn't make everybody that way. I made everybody with all kinds of different DNA. Some have more of this, less of that. Some have less of this and more of that. Okay. Why did I give people their certain DNA? So you're telling me the soul had to go in the body, right? I'm talking about reincarnation. Soul had to go in the body. Very good. Yeah. Soul had to go in the body. And it's got a specific, purpose in this world, whatever that is. Now, for some things, the soul has to go through certain things, right? But what is going on inside their DNA, they have to fight against. It's part of them. So it's much harder. If you do it to yourself, that's something else, right? That's a whole different topic. Here we're talking about God did it to you. So what's your claim? What's your obvious claim? It's your fault. That's your claim. You did it. You caused this to happen. You caused me to go through this. You caused me to transgress this. Now, what's God going to answer? What's God going to answer? God's going to say, I made you that way 100%. Why did I give you, why do you have to be in this world? Why do you have to be in this world? You have to be in this world in order to toil, in order to work hard. So I gave you certain things to work on. And other people have other things to work on. Okay. So God says, I gave it to you to overcome. I didn't give it to you so you could succumb to it. I didn't give it to you because, I just wanted you to fail. I wanted you to work on it. I wanted you to perfect it. Now you're going to say, but it's unfair. Because you put negative things inside of me. So that's harder to fight against. Okay. And as we said before, as the Chovos says, the soul at a tremendous disadvantage. When a person's born, all it wants is physical pleasure. Very good. Soul comes from the spiritual world. Soul gets trapped in the body. Yeah, what's the way to overcome it? The way to overcome it is Torah and mitzvahs. That's the antidote. Very good. That 100% is the antidote. But aren't we at a tremendous disadvantage? Couldn't we make that claim? Sure. But God, what's God going to tell you? God's going to tell you, I gave you an antidote. I mean, I have to help you overcome it, but I gave you an antidote. The more you tap in, the more control you have. Now, you're going to say, just like, when you finally figure things out, that's when things change. Then the trials become harder. Okay. But he gave you an antidote. He gave the ability to tune in the right way. Now, does that mean it's going to be easy? No. Yeah. It doesn't mean it's supposed to be easy. No one said it's supposed to be easy. That being said, it's a constant battle. Right? 100% a constant battle. But imagine what happens when you overcome it. Doesn't mean the evil inclination dies. But imagine you overcome it. You feel good about yourself. You didn't look at something you weren't supposed to. You didn't listen to that Lashon Hara, right? Or say that Lashon Hara. So you say, one for me. 20 against me, but one for me. Okay. Person can feel good. At least they didn't do that. Listen to other things. Because here someone asks, what's good is constant fear of Hashem. What do you think? God just there to beat you down? God has mercy. God understands. We're living in a cream puff generation, right? As I always say, in Psalm 34, I think it's Psalm 34, where King David himself says, right? And that's where we learn a lot about not speaking Lashon Hara, right? Says over there, don't speak Lashon Hara. It says, Sur me ra v'aseh tov. Go away from evil and do goodness. So again, my own explanation for what it's worth, right? I can take it with a grain of salt, but I would say for this generation, if you're sur me ra, at least you're going away from evil, you should have a portion of the world to come. As long as you go away from evil. I'll say tov, to do good, that's a bonus. That's my explanation. Yeah. To do good in this world, that's a bonus. But if you stay away from evil, that's huge. That's going against the norm for most people. Right? Now, is God there to, is God there just to like smack us upside the head, on a daily basis? No. What does he want? What does he want? First of all, he wants obedience. He wants us to do what he wants. We have to do what he says. But it's more than that. If you're going to do it because you're only afraid, that's the lowest level. That's the lowest level of fear of God. Yeah, that you're afraid you're going to fry in hell forever, so I'm going to do it. Well, it doesn't make so much fun, does it? You tell your kids, oh, don't worry about it, just do it. Otherwise, you want to fry in hell forever? They're like, so what? So I'll fry in hell forever, big deal. I'll deal with it then. I want to have, I want to enjoy now. There's no point in that. If there's no love of God and there's only fear of God, who's going to keep it? Now, it'll keep some people in line, keep some of the Christians in line. That's for sure. Yeah. Because they're afraid. If they don't believe in him, you fry in hell forever. Okay, but look where it got them. Yeah, so is it all about fear? It's about obedience, about being subservient. Yeah, but it's about reaching potential. God wants more than anything else that we should give our soul back as we got it. Well, that's kind of hard, right? How many people are going to be able to do that? Doesn't matter. We are here in this world to reach whatever potential we can. Right? So good, there's a deterrent. If I do the wrong thing, I'm going to get punished. But, is that all what it's kicked up to be? I mean, you say, V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. Right? We say in the Shema every day, you got to love the Lord your God. You take on the yoke of heaven, saying God is one. Right? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. You take on the yoke of heaven. And then you take on the yoke of mitzvahs. Right? If I do the right thing, good. If I don't do the right thing, okay, there'll be payback. But even before I get to that paragraph, what's the first paragraph? V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. To love the Lord my God. B'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meodecha. With all my heart, with all my soul, with all my might, my strength, my money, whatever, however you translate ma'odcha. But what's the root of the word love? The root, aleph hey beis, to love, or hey beis. What does hav mean in Aramaic? What does hav mean? To give. You want to have that relationship, you have to give. It could be payback, okay. But if you're only living out of fear, that relationship is never going to last. We'll never keep a person in line for so long. Because at some point they're going to say, you know what? I don't do enough what I'm supposed to do anyway, and I'm going to get punished anyway, so really there's no point. That's what some people will say. I'll deal with it later. Showing that, kind of stupid thing to say, but, okay, I'll deal with it later. If you knew there was even the slightest chance, right? I just saw this recently. Oh, the Ramchal brings this in Path of the Just. He said, if you knew it's 1 in 1,000, say 1 in 1,000 chance you're about to drink a cup of water. There's 1 in 1,000 chance that cup, a snake put venom in, and if you drink it, you'll die. 1 in 1,000. Says the Ramchal. Says the Ramchal over there, person will never drink it. It's 1 in 1,000. Right? I use the example of a gun. Right? 1 in 6 chance. 1 in 6 chance the person will never do it. Even if it's a 1 in 10 chance, they won't do it. You're going to say, my luck, I pull the trigger, I'll blow my brains out. Yep. Nobody would take that chance, not even today. Maybe you got a wise guy say, yeah, I'll do it. I got nothing to live for anyway, I'll do it. Yeah, most people wouldn't touch it. Even if the odds were smaller. Yeah. Or let's say better, or much larger. They still wouldn't do it. If it was 1 in 1,000, they wouldn't do it. This is what the Ramchal says. 0.001 chance you drink that water, you're going to die. Says the Ramchal, person would never chance it. They would never chance it. Now, that being said, a person is never going to want to keep Torah mitzvahs if it's only out of fear. Meaning, they have to be able to see the good. If they don't see the good in Torah mitzvahs, they only see the bad. They only say, all you do is you're going to get punished. All you do that, you're going to get punished. All you do the other thing. Right? Where's the enjoyment? As if to say there's no enjoyment at all. And if you find 1 crumb of chametz, any unleavened product, on Passover, right? You get spiritually cut off. Well, it doesn't make so much fun. Yeah. You have to understand why you're doing it. You have to understand what the purpose in doing it. God's not out there just to punish on a minor thing. Yeah, he wants you to have that relationship, but he wants you to understand beyond the shadow of a doubt, it goes two ways. Yeah, he wants what's best for us. And if you do negative things, it's going to affect you, but there'll be payback. Yeah, yeah. So you're right. It's not good to be in constant fear. 100%. You have to have fear. Fear is the basis of all wisdom. As King Solomon says. It's the base of all wisdom. You need fear 100%. But if you only have fear, as we always say, you'll never keep it. Because you'll see how far we need to go, how much a person does that they shouldn't do, right? Again, it's good for the month of Elul, taking stock of what we do. And you'll see there's no hope. Well, doesn't God have mercy? God has mercy. There's only one thing you're allowed to be afraid of. What's the one thing you're allowed to be afraid of? One thing you're allowed to be afraid of is you might forget your Torah. That's what you should be afraid of. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have fear of God. You should have fear of God. But you can't live in fear. Someone who lives in fear is a sinner. They absolutely are a sinner. So now what does it mean over here? You have to have fear. No one's saying not. But a person's constantly in fear. In general, what kind of service of God is that? I understand they don't want to make mistakes. They want to please their creator. How could they ever do anything against him? Right? And if they do, it's considered a rebellion. How can I repent for that? Good. These are good questions. These are valid questions. But if it's only about fear, God doesn't want you to be in constant fear. He wants you to have a karsatov. He wants you to have, benevolence. For what he does for you. He wants to think, what's the high, let's say better, what's the highest level of fear of God? Highest level of fear of God is what we call Yiras is Roma, God's awesomeness in the world, what he does. Yeah, how he keeps the earth on its same axis. We don't go too far to the sun, or too close to the sun, or too far back. How he creates food, wildlife, all these things. Looking into nature. That's God's awesomeness. That's the highest level. God doesn't expect the person just to lie down and say, okay, I'm going to be subservient, fear, 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 and that's it. That's not going to keep anyone religious. And there are schools that are, destroying kids. I mean, some of them like it, but some of them just like it's too doom and gloom. That's destroying them because they don't see the benefit. I understand, okay. There are modesty issues, there are other things, etc. But if they don't give the goodness behind it, the genuine goodness of what God wants from that relationship, then they're going to cause a lot of people to go off, go off the derech, as they would say. Yeah, they're going to cause a lot of people because they don't see the beauty. You got to be able to see the beauty. You got to know that we do things wrong. We got to pay the piper, as we would say. Yeah, okay. There's reward and punishment. I get it. And it's a good thing to think about during this time, right? During the month of Elul. In Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, very good. Yeah, but you have to have a balance. Because if you're only serving God out of fear, it'll never last. It'll absolutely never last. And a person will do things out of fear, you won't enjoy anything. You won't enjoy the good, even the good. Yeah, you come to Sukkot, you're building your oh, it's so hard, and it's cold, and it's this, and look, I have to buy a lulav and an esrog, and it costs money, and how do I know I'm really shaking it right? I'm doing it right, like that doesn't sound so enjoyable. Yeah, doesn't sound so enjoyable. You say, well, I'll participate in Hanukkah. Purim's a lot of fun. Yeah, maybe I'll stay up all night and eat cheesecake on Shavuot. Is very good. Yeah, but you got to enjoy. If you don't enjoy, what do you have? You have a lot of rules that you're going to say don't make sense. You're going to have a lot of rules. You're going to say, oh, the rabbis added, subtracted, Torah. You become a heretic and you leave. What's going to keep a person if it's only about fear? Again, fear is the beginning of all wisdom. Good. You need it. You definitely need it. There's no question. Yeah, but if you're going to look at it in those terms, then why bother keep it? Nobody's going to keep it that way. Now, some people would say, well, most people just blow it off. They don't think about it. Okay, that's a different problem. That's a different problem. Yeah, I can't do that either. You need a balance, right? This generation, you need a balance. I mean, every generation need a balance, but still, a person cannot live in that realm. They will not be able to live in that realm. Be impossible, right? Absolutely impossible. Yeah, yeah, impossible. Impossible. So what's going to be? Yeah, what's going to be? So the question is, how do you want to live in this world? You want to live with total fear? You won't be able to live in total fear. You won't keep anything. Why should you? Why would you keep anything at that point? Yeah, you wouldn't keep anything. Makes perfect sense because I'm not going to do it right anyway. I'm going to get punished anyway, so there's no point. Now you'll say, no, I'm still going to keep it, whatever. Okay, but you're not going to enjoy it. A person's going to feel, well, it's too much. I'm only going to get punished anyway. So there's no point. Yeah, okay. So now I'll throw the question back. So if there's no point, why do it? If you're going to live in that world, right, it's all about fear, fear, fear. I mean, you need fear. I agree. Not saying not. You need fear. Fear is the base. Very good. So even if fear is the base, how am I living? Am I living only out of fear? You're not going to enjoy it very much. Right? I guarantee you're not going to enjoy it very much. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Absolutely makes perfect sense. So fear you need 100%. But if you don't have the goodness, you don't enjoy the goodness, then all it is fear. Right? And you see videos or you've seen in person, maybe a person, seen in person, you see people sing and dance. So where's the fear? So what happened to the fear then? Well, it's time to sing and dance. It's time to have fear. Yeah. Maybe you need to have fear in a lot more things. Very good. Okay. Obviously, you need a balance, but if you don't sing and dance and you don't enjoy, then what's the point of fear? The only point of fear is we'll tell you, okay, you're gonna find out forever. Sounds like Christianity. Okay. You feel better? Is that gonna help you keep Torah mitzvahs? That's the question. Yeah. Now some people love fear. There are some people absolutely they prey on fear. Okay. And there are some people like that. Very good. So if a person likes that, it's going to keep them in line. Yeah, and they're still going to enjoy keeping Torah mitzvahs. Great. Not everyone's going to be able to hear that. Yeah, you need a balance. But again, if it's only fear, so where's the love? You can't have fear without love. Fear won't necessarily lead to love. Love will lead to fear, yes. But it won't be the other way around. Right? So the question's going to be, if I'm only living in that realm, what's going to be? It'll be one depressed heck of a person. Because you will not be keeping Torah mitzvahs at all, at any level. You're gonna say it's too hard. I'm not gonna meet the minimal level. It's way too hard. I'm gonna fail so many times. God's never really gonna accept my atonement anyway. So that's it. So what's the point? Person's not gonna keep it. Why would they? Why would they? It's not enjoyable. But you'll say they'll keep some level because they're still afraid. Okay. Yeah. So I'll ask the $1.5 million question. Person's married and the person has kids, and that's what they feel. How in the world are you going to pass that down to your kids? Come on, kids, got to do this, otherwise you're going to find out forever. How are you going to pass that down? You'll never be able to pass it down. Yeah. But you got to build your kids up also. Anyone that has kids or wants to have kids, right? You get them excited about Torah mitzvah. They help pick out a lulav and an esrog. They help build the sukkah. They prepare for Shabbos. Other things they enjoy. You think that they enjoy. Yeah. Yeah. So that's it. But if you don't enjoy, there's no point. 100% there's no point. Because it's all out of fear. Okay. They're going to keep someone in line? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to keep someone totally in line. For some time, maybe it will. So where's the enjoyment? If everything's bad and everything's hard and everything's this and that and the other thing, there's no enjoyment. You got to have a balance. Yeah, somebody asked. All right, let's do some of these questions here. King David had phenomenal eyesight. I don't know how far away Bathsheba was. Good question. But yeah, he was able to see. So I don't know if I don't know if it was a question of phenomenal eyesight or not, but he was able to see. I don't know if it was that far away. That far away, couldn't see. Could have had good, over, tremendous, tremendous eyesight. Yeah. So how is it with modesty that one would not create a parapet that blocked views during bathing? There was something up there, and what did the evil inclination do? It knocked it down. What did the Satan, whatever you want to call him, right? A wind came and knocked it down. Yeah. How it happened? Can't answer. But whatever, it knocked it down. So he was able to see. Right? But that was the whole point. That was the whole point of the test. Exactly that. And that's what the Chaim HaKadosh says. That's exactly what he says. He saw what he saw. Yeah, and then erupted in him or gave him a high awareness, of desire, right? Let's say. Right? And the actions led to what it did. So he said, you see, that a person's overcome what they see. Yeah, but that was all part of the test. That was all part of the test, I think. It's all brought down. Had he really passed that test, he would have been one of the 4 levels. Could have been. Could have been. Yeah, I think that was the test that, that sort of knocked him down a little bit. But you see, you see the power of it. Yeah. However it happened. Yeah. I don't really think it matters. I don't really think it matters how it happened. The fact is that, this thing got knocked down and he was able to see. And that led to all kinds of different things. But in the end, interesting enough, even if you say, wow, it didn't look right what he did and this and that, even though technically really there was nothing wrong, but let's say he has a child with her that takes over the kingship, which God allowed. So obviously it was meant to be. That you see for sure. It was meant to be. Yeah. Okay, a little bit strange. Say a little bit strange how it happened, and then through King Solomon, then the kingdom got split, right? Through his kids, okay. But King Solomon was able to build the Beis Hamikdash, right? Think about that. King Solomon had what his father never had, right? And that was Menuchas and Nefesh, right? He had to go fight wars, do other things. King David's running for his life all over the place, from his kids, from his enemies. He had to fight all these wars. He wasn't allowed to build the Beis Hamikdash. He wasn't allowed to build the temple. Why not? Because he had blood on his hands. Tremendous amount of blood on his hands. You're going to say it's not his fault. He had to fight all these wars, right? He had to fight all his wars, protect himself, run away, this and that. And King Solomon was in the lap of luxury. He didn't have any of these problems. Yeah. He had it very easy. Yeah, he had it very, very easy. So he was able to build the temple, and his father wasn't. So it's ironic on the one hand, that was the case. And the fact that he was the one to inherit the throne from King David himself. On the other hand, you see that even though he inherited the throne, he built the Beis Hamikdash, his kingdom was split. His kingdom got split. As we said before, Tanakh was very rich. It's very rich, if you understand what's going on behind the scenes. Look at it in face value, it's very hard to understand. Torah the same way. All the stories in Genesis, very hard to understand. All story with Lot and his daughters, right? Child comes Me'av from my father, Moab. Through Moab comes Ruth, through Ruth comes King David. Mind-boggling. No one in their right, that you have to say, God, this is God writing everything, because that makes no sense. Why would your Messiah and your future Messiah, who has to come from King David himself, has to be the lineage of King David for the Christians also, for that matter, right? According to them, even though according to the Gospels they go in different directions, exactly the lineage, totally contradiction there, but doesn't matter, right? King David, they have to have lineage to King David as well. Very good. Yeah, even so, the fact that King David comes from incestuous relationships is a mind-boggling idea, right? I would think that is one proof, one solid proof cannot be written by man. Even a committee, whatever you want to say, even the smartest of all men, who in the world is going to write about a future Messiah that's going to come? Yeah, or the Messiah is going to come from this line, this Davidic line from an incestuous relationship. You gotta be a crackpot to write such a thing. Yeah. Maybe not even for Harry Potter. It's crazy. It's a crazy idea. You think about it. That the future Messiah is going to come from that relationship. And that's where King David himself comes from. Yeah. And that's why the power of oral law, right? Of what the rabbis tell us, for one very simple reason. Because otherwise King David shouldn't be Jewish, right? Because the Torah says very clear, a Moabite can never come into the community of God. They can't convert. So how was Ruth Jewish? How was Ruth Jewish? Because the rabbis learned out it was Moabites. Men cannot convert, women could convert. It wasn't so well known. But then you had oral law to, tell everybody, and King David's status was questioned. Was definitely questioned until it became very clear. Till it became very clear that was the status. That's a mind-boggling thing. Who in the world is going to make that up? You can't make that up. As intelligent as a person would be, and you have this great committee. Imagine you're going to pass off a book, written by God himself, and their future Messiah has to come through King David, who came through an incestuous relationship. And mind-boggling. Doesn't make any sense, right? You're going to talk about the Savior. You're going to talk about him in great terms. You're going to talk, maybe, okay, tell me humble beginnings, whatever, maybe, not the lap of luxury, other things, okay, maybe. Maybe humility is good, come from a broken home, other things, okay. But you want to tell me it comes from this type of relationship? And that's where the future Messiah is going to come? That's good luck. Yeah. To say that, a committee man could write such a thing about the future Messiah, that's a stretch. That's a big stretch. Yeah, why did they do that? Why in the world, you show flaws? Especially what the Torah says about Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, they're minor flaws. Nobody's perfect. Moshe Rabbeinu, spoke to the rock, or he hit the rock, and even though water came out, right, it wasn't allowed to go in the land. Okay, he reached the 48th level of knowledge. He didn't get to the last level of knowledge. Okay. I'm saying the Torah talks about flaws of people, doesn't make them to be like great from birth and all that. They worked very hard to get they were flawed in different ways. Again, at their level. At our level we have no clue who they are. Yeah, we definitely have no clue who they are. But whatever, they went through a lot of trials. 100% a lot of trials. Any clue why converts have 7 to 10 meetings with Beis Din before conversion? I don't know. They want to make sure. You have to understand. And everyone should understand. If it takes longer, it takes longer. But what's the most important thing to understand? Any Beis Din, any rabbinical court that's going to sign off on this conversion. Yeah? If they sign, they're going to sign off on this conversion. That means that the person goes sour somewhere down the line. Now, the conversion, let's say, is valid. Let's say 100% the conversion is valid. Who gets the sins of the convert that goes off besides the convert? The Beis Din. Why does the Basin get the sin? Because they're the ones signing on the dotted line saying, they're a proper candidate. So don't you think, a Basin is gonna, they're gonna take their time. I mean, it shouldn't take more than 2-3 years. In general, that's about the average amount of time, usually about 2 years, let's say. Sometimes it can take longer. Yeah, depending where. But if they sign off on it, they have huge responsibility. Now, some basins don't care. They'll sign off on people that maybe shouldn't even convert. Okay, but they take great responsibility, huge responsibility. So I would think that they're not going to sign off on someone converting, unless they're 100% sure, or at least 90% sure. Now, it could take a number of meetings because maybe things change, maybe circumstances change. And let's say circumstances don't change. Okay. They want to make sure. They're not doing it to hold someone up. So, unless they're corrupt. And there are certain, rabbinical courts that are corrupt. I'm not necessarily talking about that. But, it's not unheard of. It's not unheard of. You could have, 4, 5, 6 meetings. That's not, or more. They want to make sure that what your level of knowledge is, what you're holding, what you've been doing. Sometimes circumstances change. Yeah. But they want to make 100% sure. Now, if they're doing it for any other reason than that, then yeah, it's a problem. Then I would agree it's a problem. Yeah. Does it have to be so many? They want to make sure. Let's say a person lives in the community for at least a year. Good. How many meetings are going to have that year? 2, 3? Then they want to see him, for let's say another year before they finally make their decision. Yeah. So again, how many could that be? Another 2, 3, 4? So you're up to 7 already. They want to see. They want to make sure. A lot of people flake out and they get the responsibility. So, if they're doing it for any other reason that's corrupt, then yeah, it's a problem. Then it's a problem. One second, let me see. Someone asked, how do you convince Hashem to show me more kindness and stability? Yeah, I would say, why doesn't, when we talk about prayer, in general, why do people's prayers not get answered? Right? Right? Why? Why is it prayers don't get answered? So in parts of Veschodon, the root of the word Veschodon is, the gematria is 550. Right? Every numerical value, every letter has a numerical value, right? Aleph is 1 base, 2 gimel, 3, 515 is Veschodon. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you're not getting into the land. Moshe Rabbeinu prays 515 different prayers, right? 515 different prayers. He doesn't give up until finally God tells him don't pray anymore. The Gemara Bracha says even if the sword is at your throat, the back of your neck, there still can be mercy. Yeah. So it says, Mori Verebi Rav Agon or Moshe Shlita should be well. He says, and it's commentary in Chumash, he says, why does a person not get their prayers answered? What does the word Veschodon mean? It means to entreat. Really, it literally means to beg. That's what it means. And he says, most people don't get their prayers answered because they're not on their knees begging. That's one reason. He says, but even if a person doesn't get his prayers answered, what does God do? Right? What should the person do? You keep praying. Even if God said no or maybe or whatever, doesn't mean he's going to say no forever. Maybe he will. I don't know. Right? At the end of the day, at the end of the day, you have to invoke divine mercy. That's what you have to do. Yeah. Yeah. When you say Shmona Esrei at the end, you say, I'm Ephrav from nothing. I deserve nothing. Right? You're the only one can help me. You have to say, Eino Mavado. You are the only one that can help me. That's it. I'm not, I'm putting my best foot forward, whatever, but you're the only one. Person has to acknowledge that on a daily basis. That can change things. But again, as my Rebbe would say, we don't change, we don't get our prayers answered because, we don't entreat, we don't beg. You might have to actually show tears also. That's kind of hard. If a person's not really so emotional. Yeah. But if you knew, you knew you had a loved one that was in danger, whatever level of danger, and you were saying to him, yeah, and you were saying something, it should be tears coming down, begging for mercy that they should be helped or healed or whatever. Why should, I remember would say, if a person prays, tears aren't coming down their eyes, you're not praying. That's not prayer at all. I mean, I go further than this. I don't want to depress anyone, but that's not what real prayer is. That's come from the heart. You gotta mean it. You can't just say the words. People say the words and they buy, they go back and forth and all that. Very good. So what? Doesn't mean you're praying. Your mind could be 10 million miles away somewhere else. Right? But if you don't have that fervor inside, you gotta say, well, God knows my heart. I don't have to do that. You could say that. You could say that. You gotta show emotion. You gotta show emotion. I've been saying Psalms for these soldiers, these people have been taken captive, and I heard somebody say, and it's very true. If this is one of your loved ones, and you're saying these Psalms, you'd be in tears. You'd be absolutely in tears. You'd be wailing saying these Psalms. But what's the problem? We're not related to these people, let's say. We don't know who they are. So, okay, we say them, we want them, released and everything else, and hopefully she'll lead normal lives afterwards. I don't know how, but, whatever it is. But if it's not you or somebody you love, a loved one, you're not going to pray the same. But someone says, why not? Why shouldn't we pray like that? Yeah. But you don't pray that way. Most people, unless they know them personally, unless you're like a really emotional person, you'll say the words, but it won't be the same. It won't be the same. That's the difference. That is the difference. Somebody asked here, I just want to deal with these questions here. 1 second. I'm talking about Uri. Uri the Hittites. Yeah, when Samuel was at Nathan, it was Nathan, Psalms chapter 41, right? Mem Aleph. He says it. Was he the lamb or the wife? No, what are you talking about? He was, he himself, again, with Mord B'Malchus, right? He was rebellious against the king, right? Since he was rebellious against the king, he had death sentence. So what he did wasn't wrong, technically, right? He put him in the front lines to die, right? He was guilty, right? Or the Hittite was guilty. Read Psalm 41, right? Read Psalm 41. Let me just bring it up here. 1 second. Let's see. I think it's Psalm 41. Sorry, no. Man, sorry, 51. It should be 51. Let me just see it here. Yeah, Nathan the prophet comes to him. Right? 51 verse 2, Nathan the prophet came to him when he went to Bathsheba, and he said, be gracious to me, according to kindness, according to great mercy, erase my transgressions, watch through my iniquity. For I know my transgressions, my sin before me, against you I have atoned. Right? You alone I have sinned, I've done what is evil in your sight, etc. Purify me with the hyssop, verse 9. Make me hear joy and gladness with the bones of the crushed exalt. Yeah, Psalm 51, right? Psalm 51. That that Nathan Hanavi, Nathan the prophet chastises. Absolutely um chastises. Isn't each base then meeting a 1K and up? No, not necessarily. It could be a lot less than that, shouldn't be. Some will take a fee, that's for sure. But doesn't mean each meeting is going to cost $1,000. And certainly Mason's not in it for the money, that's for sure. But they have a right to charge. 100% they have a right to charge. Since they have a right to charge, okay, it doesn't have to be exuberant. I mean, someone told me, to go to a certain base is going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars. I said, yeah, I'll do it for half. Right? Maybe I'll settle on a third. I mean, some charge an outrageous amount, which, I'm not going to justify. Right? 100% I'm not going to justify. Some do, but, a lot of rabbinical courts, they'll charge something. They'll definitely charge something, a minimum amount, but, they're not going to charge $1,000 each meeting. I think that's a bit exaggerated. Now, some do, they do, but I don't think so. I definitely don't think that's the case. And I know that's not the case by a number of rabbinical courts, by a number of Batei Dinim I've been in contact with. Are there some other rabbinical courts that charge a lot more? Could be, right? That definitely could be, but it doesn't have to be. And even if you say, well, I know a rabbinical court that charge $1,000 each meeting, well, okay, but I don't think most do that. Definitely don't think I don't think most do that. They take something. They take something. I don't know if they charge every single time. They definitely take, an administration fee when a person signs up, when a person wants to go through them, but they're not, I don't know if they're taking money every single time. Some may, again, it depends. Depends on the base in itself. Some might, some may not, but it's that, I know from a number of people that I think the entire basin process costs like $1,000 or like $1,500, maybe 2,000 maximum. Maximum. Yeah. So, it doesn't have to be exuberant. Definitely doesn't have to be exuberant. At all. And it's not extortion. They have a right to charge. I mean, you're taking their time. They're gonna take into account also what people have, whatever, but this is also a mistake. People say that they should do it for free. Why should they do it for free? If they can, they would. Yeah. But their time is worth something. They are spending time. So why shouldn't they be compensated? Yeah. Again, if they're charging too much, that's extortion. Okay. I would agree. Right? I'm not saying not. That's depends how much they charge. Yeah, if they charge a reasonable amount, I don't think it's outrageous. You say, but it costs a lot, and it's okay, the whole process. Yeah, you gotta buy books, you gotta get tutors, different things. Okay. Things can add up. Things can add up. But if they're charging exorbitant amounts, it's wrong. you know. So once many years ago, someone accused me, of extortion. I mean, I think people whether they can pay or not. So, I make that very clear. But, someone, whatever, really went to town because they didn't have any money, or they had very little money. I mean, I was willing to deal with them anyway. But anyway, they said it's extortion. They would say, well, plumber comes in, you're going to argue the case of how much you should charge. Maybe if you're Jewish, you might. Yeah, or, someone to fix your, I don't know, someone's going to fix your, your electricity, someone's going to fix your, whatever. They're going to build something for you. What are you going to, whatever they charge. It wasn't, if you can haggle on the price, good. Right. But in general, whatever, they charge what they charge. For a friend of mine consultant says, if you couldn't figure out how to turn on the computer, I come into your house, I'm charging you $100. Like, okay, so this person said, accused me of extortion. Yeah. So they said, what would your rabbi say? What would your rabbi say? So I said, you know what he would say? He said, time is worth something. You have all this knowledge. You should be charging more. That's what he would say. That's exactly what he would say. Yeah. So I said, yeah. And that's, just the opposite. Yeah. So that's what I would say to that. Somebody asks, one second. One second. Somebody asked for, let me get to this. Leviticus 18:3. Yeah, I haven't got there yet, right? I'm still in 18:2. Yeah, it's complicated, right? Sure, there should be some limitations. Do not walk in their statutes. It's going to be interpreted as reject the law. No, it's talking about not going in their ways, right? What's the translation here? I'm going to probably get there in the next few weeks, but the translation over here is right. You shall after the deeds of the land of Egypt, where you lived, you shall not do, and after the deeds of the land of Canaan, where I'm going to bring you, you also should not do. You should not go after what they do. Right? You should not go in their in their laws or their ordinances, right? So now someone asks, don't walk in the statutes, could be interpreted as reject the law in the country you live in. No, that's not what it means. That is not what it means. But no one does that, shouldn't do that. It's the law of the land. The law of the land, something different. We're not talking about the law of the land. Law of the land is it's a much more complicated thing because if the law of the land goes against what the Torah says, right? A person lived in Russia back in the day, former Soviet Union, whatever you want to call it, right? It's forbidden to do circumcision. But Torah said you got to do circumcision. You got an absolute obligation to do circumcision. So since you have an obligation to do circumcision, yeah, he might be sent to Siberia, might go to jail, other things. Okay, you got to try and do it, in a way. You're not going to get caught or whatever, but you have an obligation to do it. 100%, you have an obligation. You have an obligation to do it, right? So you're going to say, well, there are things the law of the land may say that go against Torah. So what do you do then? Right? I'll give an example. You have two Jews that have a dispute. So really, you're supposed to go to Beis Din, supposed to go to rabbinical court. Very good. Two Jews. Now, let's say you know that other Jews never going to come. Okay, doesn't matter. You have to summon them. If they don't come, you summon them a second time. If they don't come a second time, then the Beis Din will call them up. We'll send them we'll make sure they get, a summons. And the third time, if they don't show up, they'll hear what the other person has to say. And if they have merit to what they say, they'll allow them to go to secular court. Now, there's a problem. There's essentially a problem here. What's the problem? Secular court, wherever it is in the world, does not necessarily go according to Torah law. Right? Most times probably doesn't go according to Torah law. Sometimes between secular law and Torah law, they go hand in hand. And a lot of times they don't. So it's going to be perversion of justice. Absolute perversion of justice if you go to secular court. Okay. So even if that's true, and doesn't go according to Torah law, let's say Torah law, you wouldn't get, you'd get X and not Y or whatever it is, doesn't matter, you have no choice. In this case, why do you go to secular court? Because first of all, you have no choice, because otherwise someone could cause damage, a Jew could cause another Jew damage, and they know that if they don't show up at Beis Din, right? They don't show up to the rabbinical court, they're going to go to, secular court, and that person's not going to go to secular court. Guess what? They win. They cause damage and they win. So you can't have that because everybody would do that, right? Everybody would do that. So what do you have? So what do you do, right? So you have to go to secular court. It might be a perversion of justice according to the Torah, but you have no choice, right? And you can't go to secular court straight away if it's between two Jews, unless you have permission from the Beis Din to go. If you don't have permission from Beis Din to go, you can't go on assumptions and say, well, I know this person will never come. Even if it's true. Even if you know 100% that's true, it doesn't matter. You have to summon them. It's a very severe Torah prohibition. Very, very severe. Yeah. If the other person already went, they already took you to secular court, you got to try and bring them to, to Beis Din. If there's no way to do it, Beis Din will give you permission to go. Right? They'll normally give you permission to go. But again, it's catch-22, because if they do, if you go to secular court, it could be a perversion of justice. But the person won't go to regular Beis Din. He won't go to Beis Din. A Jew, right? The Jew won't go to Beis Din. So what do? You have no choice. Otherwise, the person's going to get messed up every single time, and people know that. They say, "Oh, we just won't show up, and if we don't show up, they won't go to secular court, so I win." So you need to go to secular court, 100%. 100%. We need to go to secular court. Now, the law of the land has many repercussions. Many, many repercussions. What happens, and we're not going to go there because it's a very big discussion, but what happens if the law of the land goes against what the Torah says? Yeah. So you're obligated not to listen to the law of the land. And what if it may land you in jail? And other things. Okay, former Soviet Union, things happen like that. Yeah, but it doesn't mean, I'm not allowed to do that. Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm not allowed to fight it. Now, if you live in a place where, there is, separation of church and state or whatever, right? So you have a way to fight it, hopefully. There's no, if there's no discrimination. Discrimination, you're gonna have a hard time. Right. And back in the day in Europe, certainly in Europe, Jews had all kinds of problems. Because they know if they go to secular court, even if they have no choice, they lose. Because they're biased against them. Yeah, totally biased against them, usually. Yeah, so why do we pray? Why do we pray every day except on Shabbos or festivals that we want to restore this process in Israel? Right, even though we have rabbinical courts here today, they will be enforced by the state, usually. Okay, but you want to see it across the board, across the board. We don't have that, right? We don't have that. It's a perversion of justice. Secular law, right? It's really like old English law, in the secular courts here, right? But again, at the end of the day, it doesn't go hand in hand. But even if it doesn't go hand in hand, yeah, the question is, if it's going to go against Jewish observance, then yeah, you have an obligation to fight it, absolute obligation to fight it. Now, in Europe they had real problems. They had real problems because anytime they got to court, they get killed. I mean, not literally, but they just totally discriminate against them. Right. So, it's why a person has to go to, to the best of their ability. They have to go to a Beis Din, and the other person won't go. Okay, so you go to secular court, right? So the states and other places is better, right? It is better. What goes on? They're more sensitive to, to Orthodox Jews and this and that. Okay, yeah, but back in the day it was horrific, right? Yeah, you're talking centuries ago. It was horrific. Jews had no rights, and they get trashed all over the place. And secular court would demolish them. We're totally demolish them. So that's not what it's talking about. We're talking about whatever. We're going to speak about it, probably very much in depth. But what it's talking about over there is not going in the ways of the Canaanites, not going in the way of the people where you are, not going in their way because of all the terrible things they do, right? So that's basically the mistake. It's not saying go against the law of the land. It's saying go against these things, these practices that they do that go against Torah mitzvahs. That's what it's talking about. Right? It's talking about go against their evil ways. Not talking about the law of the land. Law of the land is a whole different, right? It's a whole different thing. That's what it's talking about. But hopefully, in the next few weeks, we're gonna start speaking about that. What do we do in the month of Elul? Come on, this is a trick question. Tshuva, repentance, introspection, right? Really introspection. I mean, repentance is also good as well, but we're taking stock of things we need to work on. That's what we're doing. Yeah, we're reading, we're going through books of Musar, of ethics, and we understand we're not perfect. We need to, we got plenty of what to work on, etc. But Elul is all preparation. You got 30 days before you get to Rosh Hashanah. 30 days before the day of judgment. So basically, what are you doing in Elul? You're preparing for a court case. What's the court case? Court case is your life. See, non-Jews don't think they get judged. They also get judged, right? God judges the entire world, right? Not just Jews, the entire world. right? The world in general and each individual. Yeah. So now you're going in front of the heavenly court. You're going to have to plead your case in front of the heavenly court. That's what El is about. El is about introspection. I got this court case coming up. How am I going to pass this court case? You're going to say, but there are too many variables. There's a lot to work on. Yeah, there is. There's a lot to work on. Some people give up before they start, but there's a lot to work on, right? This is life and death. You're going into this court case not knowing if you're coming out alive. And we say in the Unisana Soikif in Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur by Musav, we say who by fire, who by water, gets mauled by a wild animal, dies by thirst, who dies by, what do you call it? Becomes rich, who becomes poor. I mean, you got people that we know, or potentially that we know, that are no longer here in this world. They may be younger, may be older, it doesn't really matter, right? Some people are not going to make the cut. Meaning that, God forbid this bad decree. They die. Now, it doesn't mean you can't uproot that bad decree. We said, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. Tshuva, repentance, tefillah, prayer, tzedakah, charity, can uproot a bad decree. Okay. So, if you know, and we do, that there's a court case coming up. You got a court case in front of God himself. Good, the bad, the ugly, whatever it's going to be, right? You have this court case. You're fighting for your life. Yeah? So now, let's ask the question a little bit different. What wouldn't you work on? What would you not work on to have a good court case? You got to say too many things. Yeah, I have too many. Okay, you got to take it in sound bites. What do I want to fix? How can I fix it? What level can I fix it? A lot of things. We're complex people. It's not so easy to change anything. But, you got to try. You got to put in the effort. But if you had a court case, like, let's say in 2 days, you had a court case. And in that court case, it's life or death. Absolute life or death. What's going to happen? You're going to do everything you can to get a positive outcome. Yeah, you're going to turn over the world to get good witnesses. I don't know, whatever it is. You're going to do whatever it takes not to lose. Because if you lose, well, game over. Right? Repeat after me. Iskadav v'yiskadas, right? It's a mourner's prayer. It's over. Right? So you got 30 days to prepare for that court case. It's life and death. That's what the month's about. Someone asked, one second. Somebody asks, other Basin Rose converts are lonely, no family. Of course they realize that. What do you think, Basin's stupid? What do you think, they don't know anything? My Rabbi would say, when he sat in Basin and people, arguing their cases, they think, he used to say that, they think, us rabbis are like, all we have are, our heads in the books. We don't know anything. We don't know anything about going on. We don't know anything about anyone's lives. We don't know anything about the world. All we do is have these, our heads in the books. I'm like, wow, is that partially true? I was like, come on, it is somewhat true. I mean, you do have your heads in the books, right? But they know what's going on. They 100% know the situation. They're not naive. I mean, if a person spells it out, they got it very clear. They got a very clear idea, what's going on. They understand. They understand it takes a lot of time. They understand people are lonely. They understand, their money. Of course they understand. Of course they understand. Now, you tell me, well, they don't seem to care. So I can't say how they empathize. They don't empathize. Again, they want to make sure 100%, before they're going to sign on the dotted line. They want to see this person 100% the real deal, not just to test the person. They want to see, right? They want to see, but you don't think they understand? Oh, they understand. They understand. Yeah. And again, people, and I've heard this from a number of people that, they had a lot of bad situations, they want, they want certain things, but under the circumstances, it can't be for different reasons. Yeah. I mean, like, let's say some are technical reasons. Yeah. Let's say it's not fair, and it's not right, and it's not this. But nobody does it, right? Right? In such a case, In such a well, in such a case, this is what Beis Dins do. It's not discrimination. That's what they do, right? I'll give an example. I had somebody that wanted their kids to go to a Jewish school. They weren't Jewish. So I told them, not every school will take your kids before conversion. I warned them. This person says discrimination and it's not right. They got rejected. But that's the policy of the school. Not all schools hold that way. I made that very clear. But there are schools that's their policy. 100% that's their policy. I said you can't come back to me with a claim. That's their policy. That's what they do. They could have done it a nicer way. That's their policy. What do you want? They don't accept non-Jewish kids before conversion. That is their policy. What would you like them to do? There's no way to, there's no way to make it sound nice. I mean, they could say, listen, we're really sorry, but this is our policy, right? They could say it in a nicer way, maybe. Okay. Yeah, they could say it in a nicer way, right? But even if they do, it'll make the person feel better. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to make them feel so much better. The person felt rejected. They felt they weren't listened to. Okay, but they, again, in this case, you're not fighting City Hall. You're not fighting City Hall. That's what they hold. See, you can't malign the entire Jewish community, and all the rabbis and this and that and the other thing. That's their policy. You don't like it, okay, right? But you can't come back to me and complain. I told you. I warned you. I said this could happen. I'm not saying it will. There are schools that do accept. Okay, this one doesn't. And there are others that don't. Okay. So you can have a claim against them. But they don't. That's their policy. What do you want? They don't want non-Jewish kids in their schools. Because a lot of them don't finish converting. It's just a big mess. It's a big mess. Kids don't want to play with them. They don't get values from them, other things. It makes sense. Now, if they're wishy-washy, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, you want to say they play favorites and whatever, that's a different issue. Yeah, but that's not the case. That is not the case. They're not playing favorites, not doing anything. That is their policy, 100%. That's their policy. So I got all this flack. I said, I told you. I said, I wasn't kidding. There are places will not take a non-Jewish kid before they're converted, even if they're accepted by a rabbinical court. They won't. You want to malign the entire Jewish community, it's discrimination, okay. It's not being fair. I understand, they're angry, okay. But guess what? You can't always get what you want. Torah's not a pretzel, as we always say. It's not a pretzel. I can't do what I want. Yeah, there are standards. Some people will accept them before conversion. Okay, very good. Yeah. It also comes at a price. Doesn't matter. But the point is, and I told this person, I said, okay, I understand. I understand you're upset, but you were warned. Maybe you didn't take what I said seriously. Okay. But 100%, I warned you. Yeah, I said this could happen. And they get all bent out of shape. I get it. You got little kids at home. You want to put them in, you want to start from the very beginning, giving them good Jewish values. Okay, I get it. Yeah, that's not going to place. You're going to be able to do it. It's not fair, and it's this. And person went off the deep end. Again, I understand the pain, but that doesn't change what's on the ground, right? Remember, they have a policy. That policy is not going to change. And it's not because of money. It's not because of anything. That's their policy. There are other schools that do accept. Very good. This one does. Yeah. Now, if you say I never heard such a thing, I was never warned about it, no one ever said anything, and this is total discrimination, that's a different issue. But they were warned. Again, I understand. It's painful. People want certain things. Maybe people expect certain things. Maybe people are going to say, listen, I'm giving up this, I'm giving up that. Family doesn't want me, other people don't want me, and I have a hard I get they understand that. Yeah. Any rabbinical court does conversion, they understand. 100% they understand. Maybe they don't empathize as much. I don't know. They do understand. They understand all the factors involved. 100% they do. They're not there to like put iodine in a wound. That's not their goal. They do want to see, they do want to see commitment. They do want to see a person is serious, And again, I would say, just for the record, even if it takes longer, it's better because if you screw up later, it's going to be worse. It's going to be a lot worse. Why is it going to be a lot worse? Because one of the things the Gemara says. Why is it non-Jew have it so hard after conversion, not before conversion? Why they have it so hard after conversion? Because they didn't learn enough what they should have before they converted. So now they're making all these mistakes. Okay, make all the mistakes now, even if it takes longer. I'm not saying it has to take forever, but even if it takes longer, better make all the mistakes now. Because if you make the mistakes later, you're in serious trouble. Serious trouble. Yeah. So again, I'm not saying it has to take forever. It doesn't have to take forever, but they understand. Based in 100%, they understand what's going on. They for sure understand what's going on. And some of them will take their sweet time because they want to make sure. They want to make sure the person's serious. But they understand, it's lonely, they understand, finances, and sure. They're taking all that into consideration. Now again, a person got to tell me, there are rogue basins out there and they're causing other problems. Okay, that's a different issue. I'm not talking about that. That's a totally different issue. If that's the case, it's wrong. Right? 100% it's wrong. Yeah. But they do understand. They're not stupid. They understand, they understand the situation. And they understand the hardship people go through. So it's not something they don't understand. But they're not going to convert someone, understand as well, unless the person like second coming of Moses, they're not converting them straight away. They're going to take their time. Right? Again, if they take, does that take 5 years? No. Does that take 3 years? I wouldn't say that. But they have to see them in the community. That's the hardest thing for someone. So if the person's not in the community, they can have all the knowledge and the and other things, but they're not in the community. So it's going to take them longer. I had somebody that was in the community for years. Yeah. But they were in a certain situation, they didn't even get up to patent base it until they made a certain decision. And they had to make that decision. But Basin wouldn't even sniff them. But once they made the decision, okay, it still took time. It still took time, even though in the community for a number of years. Now they're accepted by the rabbinical court. Now they get all the references. Very good. It still took them time. It took the person 10 years. Right? It was 8 years. They couldn't do anything. They were kind of stuck. And it took them 2 years after that. Yeah. But even all that time, let's keep in mind, even with all that time, I'm not here to toot my own horn, right? Even in all that time, they had plenty to learn. Plenty to learn. Even if they're in the community for 7, 8 years, doesn't matter. There are a lot of things they didn't know. A lot of things they didn't know. They got the base, and it took them another couple of years. Yeah. I'm not saying every case is like that, but there was lack of knowledge. 100% there was a lack of knowledge. Right? So it doesn't, you say, oh, he's been in the community for 8 years, this and that, so let him convert straight away. Let him go to base and convert straight away. That would have been a disaster. Would have been an absolute disaster. Would have transgressed Torah prohibitions on Shabbos, things in kashrus and other things. They didn't have the knowledge. They need the knowledge at the same time. They need the knowledge. But even if you're in the community, but you don't have the knowledge, what does it help? They're never going to convert you unless they see you have the knowledge. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying it has to take that long. I'm not saying that. Right? If a person's in the community and they have the knowledge, they should be able to convert. Right? Unless there are other factors involved. What should a person do in the case of failed conversion? Yeah. They get ill, fall into poverty during the process. Then you pick it up when you get better. Or let's say a person has to, let's say, God forbid, they have ill parents. They have to take care of the parents. So they can't live in the community now. They have to move. They have to live somewhere for however long. Take care of an ill parent. Yeah. So what do? They put it on hold. That's what they have to do. They can't, if they can't move to a community until the finances get better, then they can't move. Then you just keep doing what you're doing until you're able to do it. You don't just, a person can easily throw in the towel and say, well, I can't do it yet, whatever. So learn. So get the knowledge, do what you need to do. And then when things get better, then you do it. Yeah, that's what I'd say I have a number of cases like that. The hardest thing is to be able to move, right? If a person can't move, you learn as much as you can before that, right? That's the benefit because you get the knowledge that you need, right? And you practice it once you're able to move or whatever. And some people get sidetracked, not just saying by someone gets, parent gets ill. Could be any number of things, but I know from a number of people that just whatever they get sidetracked. They know they have to move, they know they have to get out, this and that. One thing leads to another. They get lazy, and then 6 months go by, a year goes by. And how'd they get sidetracked? Because they get sidetracked. Not for anything necessarily so serious, but they get sidetracked. But there are people for serious things that can get sidetracked, and until that changes, right? Some people have to take care of elderly parents. Let's say that's a good example. Yeah, they can't move until something happens, and they're stuck. Okay, so what do you do in the meantime? So you learn. You learn as much as you can. You try and apply as much as you can. And then when the situation changes, then you move. Right? Then you move and you come even much stronger because you should have all this knowledge. By that time you should already have that knowledge. Okay. Right? But yeah, so you wait. There's nothing else to do. There's nothing else to do. But that can lead to depression, to other things, but you learn. You learn and keep whatever you can keep wherever you are. Right? Until you're able to move and get out. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. This every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions? Find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos and Q&As. Ethics for Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN at gmail.com, whichever good. Beginning of the day, middle of the day, depending where you are, or